God, my brain fucking hurts. Jeez, it's like you're trying to produce these ultra-intellectual takes every few seconds. Like, it just hurts. Just my mind everywhere. It's all over the fucking place. Today, and yesterday, and a week, and just fucked. Internally. But I gotta say what needs to be said here. So, we're gonna talk about what is the metaphysical antithesis to intellectualism. And this is this philosophy known as irrationalism. Now, this isn't like an in-depth analysis, like a bull's deep dive into the pussy that is irrationalism. It's just a simple overview, an explanation of its fundamentals, its basic outline, so you can get a good, relatively decent understanding of what it is, as a concept, as an historical idea. And so, to begin, we're actually going to be talking about what is logic and what is intelligence in order to talk about the philosophies that are intellectualism and irrationalism. So, when people talk about logic, logical sense, reason, what are they referring to? Well, the truth is, I don't know what they're referring to. I mean, it might as well have nothing to do with reason, or not be exactly precisely what reason is, but I certainly know what it is, regardless of what others say. Reason is the positive tendency to correctly identify things as that which they indeed are. So, for example, let's say we have a tree, right? You would indeed say, that tree is a tree. Of course it is, because it wouldn't be a tree in the first place. I mean, it can't be a tree and simultaneously, in the same sense, not be a tree. And this is what we call the law of non-contradiction. So, for example, if I have an apple, if I put an apple on the table, on my desk, if I put it on the moon, if I put it in a backyard, or I take it to Mexico, or I take it to Argentina, or I take it to Zimbabwe, it's still an apple. It doesn't become something else. It is not converted into a different fruit or a different object of any variety. It is an apple. And I'm still calling it an apple. Now, someone might come along and say, oh, I believe in apples, and then they point to an apple. It's an apple, of course. But then that apple gets transported to Madagascar, and they say, well, that's no longer an apple. Now, to clarify, nobody's saying this, but it's a metaphor, of course. I mean, that someone can claim to believe something, but, when that certain thing is put under different alternative circumstances, suddenly they flop. And I don't just mean they flip, I mean they flop. You can flip a few times. I've flipped. I've changed my politics a lot, honestly, over my lifespan, because of course, that's what you do if you're mature and you care about reason and you care about being correct. Correctness in general. But I've never flopped. This is flopping. It's like when you don't even really believe in anything. It's like, if I were to say, for example, I support free speech, just not hate speech. Which makes no sense, because hate speech is pretty much all that free speech is. I mean, clearly, we wouldn't be talking about free speech unless that speech in question, which we're talking about whether or not it should be censored, is, controversial. Nobody's intending to silence non-controversial speech. So obviously, hate speech in reference to free speech is the only real free speech that should ever be discussed. Duh. And so when somebody says, oh, I support free speech, but I don't support hate speech, it's like saying I believe something is an apple until it transports continent or country. Or it's like saying I believe in physics, just not gravity. You see, so this person is an idiot, obviously. Now, when it comes to correctly identifying things as that which they are, if something truly is, say, a house, we refer to it as a house. And if you say, well, a house isn't a house, you mean to say what's semantically referred to as a house isn't a house. But if you mean in the literal sense of a house, meaning that you're calling it a house, but you believe it's not a house, that makes no sense. This is what we mean, again, by the law of non-contradiction. Something can't cancel something else out. You can't believe things that contradict one another. But in order to even come to the law of non-contradiction, we first have to talk about the law of identity. And as I've already talked about, the law of identity is simply stating that A is A. It is the axiom that is physically impossible to disagree with. Yes, it is physically impossible to disagree with A is A. Because if you say A is not A, but you just said it was A, I mean, so what is it? See, that's the contradiction, right? This is what I mean, like the first law relates to the second law. Firstly, something is that which it indeed is, which you've already identified it to be, and it cannot be something else simultaneously that cancels it out. So, for example, if I were to say, I support everyone's right to vote, but then I turn around and I say people who are incarcerated should not be permitted to vote legally, then I do not believe in everyone's right to vote. I have contradicted myself. I cannot believe in everyone's right to vote, not just some people, but everyone, as I've just stated, whilst claiming at the same time some people should not be allowed to vote. You see, that there's not a right. See, I don't actually support the thing that I just claimed to support. And in my mistake, in my unreason, in my illogical sentiment that I just expressed, just as a hypothetical, of course, as an example, I have committed what we call stupidity, unintelligence. It is the tendency on intelligence to misidentify things as that which they are not. So if I see a bird and I claim it is a walrus, then I'm just not good at identifying things. But here's the thing, right? In politics, anything. If I make a statement like, all balloons are red, which isn't correct, not all balloons are red, but then someone looks at that statement, which I wrote out, by the way. I typed it, maybe it's on the internet, on an internet forum, whatever, on social media maybe. And then somebody reads it as, and they speak the same language, mind you, all balloons are blue, despite the fact that I just said all balloons are red. They're what we call fucking retarded, right? Because they don't have the cognitive ability or whatever it is, that they just have the tendency not to identify things as that which they are. They misidentify them. They perceive them to be something alternative, something which they are not. And so now that we understand what logic is, just relating to the law of identity and the law of non-contradiction, and we understand that intelligence and the intellect is all about the tendency to be correct when it comes to logic, when it comes to utilizing it and not abusing it and understanding it, and applying it to our day-to-day lives, we can then talk about what intellectualism and irrationalism are and how they approach the concepts of logic and intelligence. So, within the Enlightenment, this term intellectualism is, to an extent, sort of an umbrella term. It can refer to a bunch of different ontological beliefs: materialism, scientism, positivism, rationalism. It can even refer to things such as physicalism, and, just like all the very material, secular, anti-God, anti-church beliefs that came about during the late 18th century, especially in France. And so intellectualism refers to the belief that the intellect is more important than human sensibilities, than emotion. It's far more important, and it needs to be prioritized. It needs to be considered superior in all aspects of life. And it believes, as with rationalism and all that the reason we do anything should only be in accordance with logic. So if something is illogical, if it isn't based upon science, if it isn't reasonable, then don't do it. It's bad, right? And everything good is that which is logical. Seems pretty simple, and it is what people, generally think. I mean, we like to picture ourselves as logical, rational acting beings, I guess. But there is this opposing view, and this is irrationalism. And irrationalism, despite the name, is not at all encouraging or endorsing being irrational. It's not saying irrationality, the state of being bad at identifying things, is good. No, obviously it wants to use reason, but for different purposes. It states that reason exists and is positive in the world only insofar as it serves something external to logic. So, for instance, in intellectualism, what would be stated is that when you're at work and when you're given a task to do, when you have to complete a certain thing, you do it in the order that you've learned. Or when you're doing like a mathematics equation or something like that, you're following rules because these rules in themselves are logical. And logic in itself is a positive thing. It's good. Just doing anything, even if it doesn't seem logical, for the sake of logic, is good. So, for example, when you pick out a bunch of ingredients to make yourself a sandwich, and, you eat that sandwich, the reason you're getting some happiness out of it, or you're filling your stomach or whatever, you're putting on a little bit of calories or whatever, the reason you do that is because reason. There is reason, even if you don't see it at first. If you think about it enough, you're like, oh, okay, this is beneficial and in accordance with the concept of logic. And I am living my life very logically. And that's good. Being rational and rationalistic is all good. But rationalism would say that using reason to identify healthy ingredients, using reason to identify the machinery at your job position as the machinery which you need to use, and disassociating it with the stuff that you're not supposed to touch, which you shouldn't use, that, you shouldn't touch chemicals that will kill you. You're using this logic for external purposes. It's not related to logic. You're doing it because you want to be happy, because you don't want to be harmed, because you don't want to be hurt. So reason exists and is positive insofar as it serves a different purpose. I mean, the reason you wake up in the morning and do everything you do in the afternoon, in the night, so on in the morning, what you do throughout your days, you're using logic because it's going to make you happier, and because it's going to create a more peaceful environment, or because it creates a cooperative society. But it's not good in itself. The things you do just because you're trying to be logical, because you're trying to be this big-brained intellectual person. No, irrationalism, which is its own philosophy separate from anything that came out of the Enlightenment, and was a reaction to a lot of Enlightenment ontology, kicks at this idea that we only do things because they're logical. It says that we should use logical sense because of things external. So here's the thing with what irrationalism states, and anyone who has throughout the years, ever since the Enlightenment, promoted irrationalism, they're saying that logic is an element, like the 4 elements from Avatar: The Last Airbender. It's one of the many elements of life. There are many things to life. There is happiness, there is joy, there's sadness, there's anxiety, there's all these different emotions you might feel. There is purpose in life. There is acquiring inner peace after a very long, difficult journey filled to the brim with strife. But logic is only one of the many puzzle pieces to unlocking a good life. And that logic alone isn't the reason we exist, or should exist for that matter. When it comes to editing a video which you can upload onto the internet, sure, I have to use logic. I mean, I have to identify the tools as that which they are. I have to open up the video recorder. I have to, open up the little thing I use to record my voice, Audacity. I have to do that. I have to use these different programs. I am looking at them and knowing and recognizing them as the things which they are. If I thought there was something different, I wouldn't be able to make videos, would I? And nobody would, for that matter. In fact, if we didn't use logic, we wouldn't be able to do anything. We wouldn't be able to speak, because it wouldn't matter what words we use at all, or if we don't use any words, because then nothing matters if you reject logic entirely, which is not what irrationalism is trying to do. You wouldn't be able to get to doing other things in life. But irrationalism is saying that the reason we do these things, the reasons we use logic, is because it's benefiting us, what we get out of that. We make videos or eat sandwiches or, go out with our friends or loved ones or whatever because it is benefiting us. It is making us happy. And not to be a hedonist about it, because historically fascists have not been hedonists and have actually criticized it rather thoroughly, but rather to fulfill another purpose in life. I mean, there are things which fascism and a lot of right-wing traditionalist ideologies hold dear, such as honor, tradition, being very responsible to one's family, being responsible to others, being respectful, being calm, having self-control. fulfilling things that you set out to achieve, and not being a hedonist, not lounging around doing nothing, not thinking that pleasure is the only thing in life. But that's actually the thing. Logic isn't the only thing in life. Reason isn't the only thing in life. Reason does not help you or benefit you in itself, is what they've been saying time and time again. The same problem of hedonism, which views life as just a struggle for sensual pleasure and nothing else. Happiness is not all there is. Irrationalism criticizes that in the same way that it criticizes the intellectualists who believe everything is about the intellect, achieving intellectual pursuits. But life is not like that. Life is this massive puzzle, and logic is just one of the many pieces. But here's the thing with idealism, right? With understanding the belief that everything exists in the mind and exists only as far as you can observe it and is part of our collective consciousness, the consciousness of the world. Reason is, in this sense, a social construct, is what idealism and irrationalism and, of course, fascism, obviously, would hold. Because our mind, our consciousness, comes first. It is the first thing in the galaxy, in the universe, in existence, in the timeline of all time to ever exist, because it's that which permits anything else in the future, anything which has came after it, to exist as well. This is the idealist worldview. And so, with this in mind, we know that there is no, well, what is this thing? How could we identify it? There is just, we look, and we can see, and we can hear, we can feel, and if we can't have these feelings, then whatever is supposedly exists doesn't actually exist. Matter is created by us. We create the material. The material does not create us. And so ontological idealism would hold that we shape logic. Consciousness creates right and wrong, true and false, correct and incorrect. It creates all these things. The state of anything is socially constructed. If you feel that there is a nation here, that there is this country which surrounds you and all the people around you, if you feel you are a people, because you feel it, and it's within your consciousness, it's real. The realest anything can ever be. And so, logic, likewise, is the same thing. You're doing it because whatever meaning your life has, it is determined entirely, collectively, democratically, by consciousness, by the imagination, what the imagination suggests to us. If the imagination said, the meaning of life is to be the most logical human being in the world, and to always follow logic, and to suck off logic, and to give it a blowjob every day, and to wrap your mouth around its and the point is, if it said that, then I guess that would be reality. But it's not really doing that, because people don't really think like that. People think more in terms of, what is this action, which requires me to use logic, because all actions do, of course, get me? What does it get me? What do I get out of it? What do I gain? What do I get out of it again? So this is a serious question. And so what irrationalism is saying, and has been telling us over and over and over again, is that logic exists to benefit other parts of our lives. Doesn't exist for itself. What would a world where only logic looks like be? Like, what kind of world would that be? Well, it would mean destroying all of our emotions because they're illogical, and becoming machines, right? But the most generic kind of machines, where we just process things as that which they are, and nothing else exists. Clearly, a world full of pain and suffering, even if it were to be logical, would not benefit anybody. So how can logic thus be good if it's not leading to what our society conceives, through its imagination, as good? Well, in idealism, it cannot be at all. But also, a lot of the things, this is the thing with social constructivism, are created by the imagination and aren't quote-unquote logical in the traditional sense of the word, but that doesn't devalue them. For instance, it has been pointed out by many, but not enough people, that romantic love is a social construct, and idealism does not disagree with this fact. Yes, romantic love is not a genetic thing, It's not a biological thing. You can't actually feel any different for a certain person than you can from a statue or a painting or some flowers. It's not a real thing. In the biological sense, that is. But because this is not a pro-scientism view, irrationalism, because it believes that things can exist without the need of science supporting them, holding them together, it would say, if a romantic relationship is beneficial to you and your partner, and it's consensual entirely, it's entirely enthusiastic, and it makes both of you happy, and it makes you want to live life and not kill yourselves, then what's the problem? I mean, are you saying, but because romantic love doesn't exist, therefore it's bad, therefore we as a society should never pursue it? Well, then how is logic good if it means being less happy? If it means not having any honor or any things to work toward in life? The answer is, well, it doesn't look pretty. This logicistic view is not pretty. It is not aesthetically pleasing. But the imagination is all about that which seems good. The seeming being the making. If you see something as good, that society sees it as good, it is thus good, because democracy and the imagination, this has been talked about before. Fascism views the mind, not defined in any material terms like the brain, but defined in a spiritual sense, as that which creates right and wrong, which creates reason, because, reason came out of consciousness, not the other way around, and creates the environments and landscapes we live in. So we can say in one sense that because something is logical doesn't mean it's good in itself. Logic is just a bridge we use to get to things that are good. And so a romantic relationship, despite the fact that, yes, romance genetically does not exist, it can still be very beneficial to everyone and make the world a better place. What is the issue? What do the rationalists have against fun, or honor, or respect, or duty, or anything like that? Well, they're just very focused on being mechanical and machine-like in all ways, to the point where they prioritize one aspect of human existence above all else, despite the fact that, well, it's not the most important part of human existence, and it can never be. But for those that want some information, a lot of information, if you will, on irrationalism, want some reading material, I do have some books for you. Naturalism and the Human Condition Against Scientism is a book that, as you guessed by the title, critiques scientism from an irrationalistic viewpoint and says that science isn't the greatest thing ever. More specifically, the mind creates science, the science doesn't create the mind, and so on. The Reinstitution of Man, C.S. Lewis in the Case Against Scientism, the title says it all. Moral Sentimentalism, another book you might want to check out. And The Ethics of Care and Empathy, which is a deep dive into moral sentimentalism. The belief that our emotions are a lot more important than long-term logical thoughts. But lastly, let me read a quotation from Oswald Spengler in regards to this whole debate. Spengler asserts the materialist version of history, which sees economics as cause and all else, as effect appeals to irreligious city-dwellers who have severed all ties with tradition. Spengler sees this attitude based on 19th century science and argues that the 20th century is the age of psychology. We no longer believe in the power of reason over life. We feel that it is life which dominates reason.